Hello, and welcome to another video on leadership and well-being, brought to you by the Education Broker. School leaders are incredibly good at taking care of other people, but sometimes we don't attend to our own well-being quite as much as we should. But it's like the oxygen mask scenario. You need to attend to your own mask first before you can help anybody else. So these videos are aimed at getting school leaders to consider their own well-being. And today I want to particularly talk about the importance of asking for help. So if you're new to these videos and you've not seen me before, my name's James Hilton. I had 26 years experience of teaching. I was a senior leader for 23 years. And I was head for 15 years, latterly of a school that grew rapidly from around 150 to around 800 pupils. But these days, I make my living as a speaker and as an author, talking about leadership, resilience, and well-being. Now, I think we all have our own leadership heroes. And when we think of our heroes, we often think of their qualities, and they tend to be people who are quite courageous. They tend to be people who are decisive, and we tend to think of them as being fairly self-reliant people. And self-reliance in leadership is really quite important. People who are self-reliant leaders are self-motivated. They don't particularly seek the approval of others, doing what they think to be right rather than what they know might be popular. And they don't need other people to motivate them. They have an internal locus of control. Whereas people who are not self-reliant tend to be much more motivated by external factors, and often authority figures. Might be the head of a MAT, or it could be the chair of governors, or it could be Ofsted or Estin, for example. So without that motivation, then they can often become quite stagnated, and they often feel and experience the fear of failure. So self-sufficient leaders are people who are more afraid of not trying than of failing. They tend to see mistakes or setbacks as stepping stones to eventual success. So self-reliance is quite an attractive prospect, and we all need it as school leaders up to a point. Nobody, after all, likes being completely reliant on other people for their own sense of happiness and well-being. And we can actually build our self-confidence and our self-reliance by being honest with ourselves. And one of the things that I think is really important is a bit of bragging. Now, nobody likes somebody who's a show-off or a bragger, but I'm talking about an internal bragging. And from time to time as a leader, particularly if I was getting a bit buffeted or unsure of myself, I would write in the list, at the back of my diary, a list of my achievements to remind myself of all that I had succeeded in the past. So a bit of internal bragging actually helps our motivation and our confidence. The other thing we can do is sometimes to toughen up a bit. I would have to be honest and say that I tended to wear my heart on my sleeve, and I tended to take criticisms personally, particularly, for example, if it was a parent who was coming in to complain. And I used to have to remind myself that if somebody else was sitting in my chair, they would be having exactly the same conversations. And that being the case, then it wasn't my fault. It was the situation rather than me personally. And when I think back over 26 years in teaching and the hundreds of families who I dealt with and the hundreds of kids that I taught, I can only think actually of one or two parents who had any kind of personal problem with me. The rest of the time, it was because of the chair that I was sat in. So the other thing to do is to consider your thought failures, and we all have them. We all have career knockbacks, but see actually negative feedback as a useful tool, embracing it, learning from it, and improving our plans. And I think we have to then come to the notion that self-reliance is sometimes oversold, that we are overschooled in the idea that as leaders, we need to be completely self-reliant. And actually, there are times when we do need to ask for help and give ourselves permission to do so. And there are real benefits to asking for help at times. So asking colleagues for help actually raises their self-esteem, to think that you value them enough to ask for their assistance. And by sharing with other people and sharing your difficulties and your problems, actually what you do is strengthen the team, because you end up promoting connectivity. People like to feel valued, and staff who feel valued tend to be a happy staff, and a happy staff makes for happy kids and for a happy school. People do like, generally speaking, to help other people, partly because they get a kick out of it. I was crossing the road the other day at a pedestrian crossing when a woman in front of me with a pushchair and a toddler dropped a 4-pint bottle of milk onto the road, which I then picked up for her because she got her hands full. She was grateful. I felt good. It's a win-win situation. Random acts of kindness, helping other people, does actually make us feel good about ourselves. The other advantage of actually reaching out and asking for help from other members of staff is that we can often find that they have strengths and qualities perhaps we hadn't previously realized. And by getting other people's advice and input, it can sometimes help to break the cycle that we get ourselves into, which is that we have the same old thinking and the same old results. And we keep doing the same thing, perhaps a bit harder, a bit faster, but fundamentally we get locked into this loop of thinking and we end up getting, unsurprisingly, much the same results. But by asking other people for their opinion and getting input, it helps us to break this cycle. So if there are benefits to seeking help, why is it that some school leaders don't actually do it? Often I think it's to do with pride. That I remember thinking when I was appointed as head of the school that I had been appointed because they thought I was going to be really good at the job. And I'd like to think I was, but I wasn't good at everything. And I had chinks in my armor. For example, I wasn't particularly good when I first became a head at financial planning. I was very poor at maths as a pupil myself. And whilst not making any excuse for it, I had to work hard to improve those skills. But admitting to other people that that was a chink in my armor, particularly the people who'd appointed me to the job, was quite difficult. And a lot of leaders do sometimes experience this sense of pride, and perhaps that people will judge them if they reach out and ask to others to help. So that may be one reason, pride, why people don't always ask for help. Another, I haven't met many, but I have met one or two leaders in my time who really did think they had all the answers. And they were actually leaders, by and large, who were feared, I think, rather than respected. And I think they create a culture whereby if they're not expected, staff are not expected to come up with solutions to the problem that their leaders will, problems just tend to get passed up the line until the person in charge has all the problems of the entire staff on their shoulders. And that can be quite crushing at times. But I think there are also people who are just scared of being found out, really. It's a difficult one. So let's talk a little bit about how to ask for help. I think, first of all, you need to be honest with yourself. Recognize what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Recognize where there are other people who may be more skilled in a particular area than you are. And I think you have to have an honest conversation with yourself. Do you have the physical and the mental capacity in order to be able to resolve the problem for yourself? And if not, that is the point at which to start asking other people. Secondly, you need to encourage a positive response from staff when you ask them for help. And we do that by creating a culture where people feel that you support them and you help them when they're in a tough position. And if they've experienced that from you, you're far more likely to get a positive response from them in return. Next, do your homework. By this, I mean, really think about the problem. Have you explored all possibilities before asking other people? Are there solutions that you haven't perhaps considered? Because you need to look like you've done your homework before you ask other people. Because whilst they may be happy to help, they've got responsibilities of their own. So we need to make sure that we're asking for all the right reasons. Don't underestimate people. Don't underestimate people's willingness to help, because I think you'll actually be pleasantly surprised if the culture of helping one another and supporting one another is truly there. And don't beat yourself up about it. It isn't a failure asking other people for help. And actually, if you get other people involved and you solve the problem, the entire school benefits. We all benefit. So you're actually doing people a favor in the long run by utilizing their advice and help to solve the problem for the entire school. Consider who is the best person to ask to help you. Is it one person? Or would you be better asking perhaps a team of 2 or 3 people with different ideas and different skills to consider? Be clear when you go to them about what it is that you want. Is it advice? Is it another opinion? Or actually you ask something a bit more tangible, some practical help? Get in contact with them. And whatever you do, don't do it by email. Go and see them. That physical connection is far more important and far more likely to elicit a positive response from the person that you're asking. And you've got to be open-minded, because they may come up with ideas that are quite different to yours. And that's actually a good thing. But we need to get rid of that rigid mindset and be open to what other people might want to say. Show your appreciation. When you finish talking to them, tell them how much you appreciate their help and how much you value it. And finally, offer them something in return. I don't mean something physical. I mean saying to them, and if there's anything I can do for you, either now or somewhere down the line, please let me know. Because it's important to get that reciprocity. So those are some of my tips for the best way to ask for help. And I used to think actually asking for help from other people as a leader was a sign of weakness. Having spent a long time over the last few years writing about resilience and interviewing people who have been resilient leaders over a number of years, I've come to realize one thing. These people who've stayed resilient are not people who are living charmed lives where nothing goes wrong for them. These leaders have exactly the same trials, tribulations, and hurdles as everybody else. But the reason that they have stayed resilient over time is that they've recognized there are times in your career when you actually do need to reach out to other people. And it's not the sign of weakness in a leader, it's a sign of strength. Because resilient leaders know that they need to seek support from a variety of sources in order to maintain their own well-being. And in these COVID times, that self-care for school leaders is more important than ever. Thank you very much for watching.